The vertebrae of the cervical spine are smaller and more delicate than those of the thoracic and lumbar spine. Due to its exposed location above the torso, its inherent flexibility, and because the cervical spine is sometimes called upon to dissipate axial forces that are several times the individual's body weight, during contact sports, for example, the cervical spine is the most commonly injured part of the spinal column. Within the cervical spine, the most common sites of injury are around the second cervical vertebra, the C2 or axis, or in the region of C5, C6, and C7. Broadly speaking, the cervical vertebrae are unfused and articulate with each other via intervertebral discs, which separate the vertebral bodies and provide cushioning and flexibility to the vertebral column below the level of C2. These form intervertebral symphysis joints, articular facets, which form zygoapophyseal and atlantoaxial joints, and oncovertebral articulations, also known as joints of Luschka, which are present in the C3 to C7 spinal segments and are located on the posterior lateral border of the intervertebral disc and in the anterior medial portion of the intervertebral foramen. The third to sixth cervical vertebrae have a typical structure. The first, second, and seventh are atypical. Typical vertebrae have rectangular bodies anteriorly, with articular uncinate processes on their lateral aspects, triangular vertebral foramina, bifid spinous processes, and transverse foramina. The first two cervical vertebrae are specialized bones that function as an important unit. The atlas, C1, articulates with the occiput of the skull superiorly and with the axis, C2, inferiorly. Around 50% of cervical spine motion occurs at these two joints. The atlanto-occipital joint permits the majority of flexion and extension, whereas the atlantoaxial joint permits the majority of rotation. Varying amounts of flexion, extension, lateral bending, and rotation occur from C3 through to C7. The atlanto-occipital joint is a bicondylar synovial joint that bridges the gap between the cranium and the vertebral column. Its articulating surfaces are the occipital condyles of the cranium and the superior articular surfaces of the lateral masses of the atlas, C1. The joint is supported by a network of ligaments which allows certain degrees of flexion, extension, lateral flexion, and rotation of the cranium. The main role of these ligaments is to reinforce the joint and prevent any bony obstruction of the spinal cord in the foramen magnum. The atlantoaxial joint is a pivot synovial joint between the atlas and axis vertebrae. These vertebrae articulate with each other at three separate synovial joints, two lateral plane synovial joints and one median pivot joint. The lateral atlantoaxial joints are comprised of the lateral masses of the atlas and the sloping superior articular facets of the axis, which are bound and supported by an articular capsule. These lateral joints are typically classified as plane synovial joints. The median atlantoaxial joint is a pivot joint formed by the dens or odontoid process of the axis articulating with the anterior arch of the atlas. The atlantoaxial joints are supported by a variety of ligaments which contribute to the freedom of the joint's movement. These ligaments include the capsules that surround each joint, the anterior longitudinal ligament, the posterior ligamentum flavum, the transverse ligaments of the atlas, and the cruciate ligaments. The axis is connected to the occipital bone via the tectorial membrane, the alar ligaments, the median apical ligament, and the longitudinal segments of the cruciate ligaments. The tectorial membrane is a strong fibrous band that extends from the basilar part of the occipital bone to the posterior surface of the bodies of the second and third cervical vertebrae. The tectorial membrane stabilizes the cranium during flexion and extension of the neck. It also reduces any posterior movement of the dens. Next, we'll review the musculature of the cervical spine. Note that I've already discussed the intrinsic and extrinsic muscles of the back in the introductory video on the spine. Here, I'm going to concentrate on the muscles of the neck. The anterior neck muscles include the platysma, sternocleidomastoid, the anterior vertebral muscles, and the lateral vertebral muscles. The platysma is a broad, thin muscle that overlies the other muscles and neck structures and is involved in facial expression. The sternocleidomastoid arises from the sternum and the medial third of the clavicle and passes obliquely across the side of the neck to insert into the mastoid process. The anterior vertebral muscles include longus colli, longus capitis, rectus capitis anterior, and rectus capitis lateralis. These muscles assist the sternocleidomastoid in neck flexion, rotation, and lateral bending. The lateral vertebral muscles, or the scalene muscles, attach from the cervical vertebrae to the first and second ribs. They act as weak movers of the neck and are also accessory muscles of respiration. The muscles of the posterior division include the trapezius, splenius capitis, semispinalis capitis, and levator scapulae, all of which I've discussed elsewhere. The posterior muscle groups maintain posture and act as neck stabilizers and extensors.